Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Max Verstappen has reaffirmed his plan to potentially retire from Formula 1 in 2028 when his Red Bull deal comes to a close, but also confirms that he does expect much stiffer competition next season from Mercedes and probably Ferrari as well. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Big news all around the teams right now confirming their drivers. We've known the vast majority of the grid until this past weekend, where we had our final confirmation. But Piastri is in the McLaren. They're doing some tests basically. Like I think it's tomorrow they're doing another tyre test, a lot of these teams. So they've been doing marketing stuff here in Yas Marina with their drivers. Piastri, of course, alongside Norris next season. Very exciting prospect in the McLaren. Then Gasly also having his kind of seat fitting or whatever's going on here with Alpine. So Gasly was in the Alpine garage. We also saw Alonso go over to the Aston Martin garage, kind of having a full tour right here, kind of before the team packs up and goes away, because they've got to be there tomorrow anyway for the tyre test. Might as well show the guys around. I'm sure Nick De Vries a similar story with alpha tauri for next season. And then confirmation this morning, the first full-time F1 driver from the USA in Formula 1 for about 15 years is going to be Logan Sargeant. He did what it took in Formula 2 this weekend to get the job done, get the super license points, and he will drive alongside Alex Albon next season. Exciting prospect, I think, for Sargeant, and also for American Formula 1, I suppose, in general. So that was indeed confirmed this morning officially. For some reason, I've got two of the same tweet, but that's absolutely fine. That means this is the full lineup for next year. The top teams have known for quite some time, and then the Ocon, Gasly, drama, Norris, Piastri, Bottas, Zhou, Magnussen, of course, Nico Hülkenberg joining him, and then Yuki Tsunoda, Nick De Vries, the shortest F1 pairing or driver pairing in Formula 1 history, I believe, and then Stroll, Alonso, Alex Albon, Logan Sargeant, rounding out the grid for next season. And also quite cool, I thought to mention, is that the four previous winners of the Antoine Hubert Award, the basically the Formula 2 Rookie of the Year Award, are all currently on the grid. So pretty cool stuff. Now let's talk about the World Constructors Championship, because this season Mercedes dropped from first down to third. Ferrari and Red Bull both went up one place. Alpine went up one place. McLaren went down one place. And then quite some changes at the bottom here, because you've got lesser points scored. It makes things a bit more volatile. Aston stay seventh. Alfa Tauri, awful season for them with the 9th constructor this year. Haas go up a bit. Williams back to 10th. And yeah, Alfa Romeo, they had some good progress as well this season, based largely on having a car that was pretty solid at the start of the year. Scored some good points and hold on just about for 6th place at the end of the season. So what do we expect to see over time here? What's going to happen at the top as well? It's highly unlikely any team that isn't currently in the top 3 is actually going to be able to compete for the championship. The intention is, with the budget cap right and the kind of the way that the testing time gets skewed towards teams that place lower, should mean over time we get a more competitive grid. But for next year, realistically, we're expecting only 3 teams to have a decent chance of actually forming the car that's going to win both championships. Now, Verstappen dominated the season. Funny, really, he had more P7s than he had anything else, P2s, even P3s, and he would have had 3 P7s if he'd have given the position back to Perez, which he didn't. He decided he wanted a P6 for himself as well to try and tick every single box this season. But 15 victories, just absolute dominance pretty much from start to finish, outside of course the drama at Bahrain and Australia, and after that it was all, well, plain sailing really for Max Verstappen and Red Bull. Now the question has been raised to him before and has been raised again: what's going to happen when his contract ends? His deal with Red Bull is for a long time, until 2028, when he'll be 31, which relative to Hamilton and Alonso and even Vettel is pretty young, right? 31 for an F1 driver, that's still, you know, certainly prime territory. But for Verstappen, he's been in the sport for so long at this point, won his first race like back in 2016 now. He's been on the grid for ages already, it seems. So by the time it gets to 2028, he'll already have been in the sport for well over a decade, at which point he might think, you know what, it might be time to call it a day. So he's definitely not saying at all that he wants to stay around much longer. I'm sure he sees what's going on with Vettel and, you know, the family obligations and stuff like that. He says, look, it depends a bit on how competitive they are in 2028. He's still got time to make this decision, but he says, look, I want to do other stuff. F1's amazing. Like even Alonso's mentioned in the past that Verstappen is keen to kind of do more endurance racing, maybe do Le Mans or something like that, right? And no, he says, look, it's lots of traveling though, and it's a lot of races, and certainly that is true now more than it's ever been. That doing 24 races potentially next year, probably be 23 without China, but still, that's a lot of races in a season. And as he says at one point, what's more important, family or is F1 more important? That's when you need to make your mind up. Now, he also goes on to say this about the competition next season, saying he does not believe it's going to be as easy as it was this year for him and for Red Bull. I do think it will be closer. People are understanding the cars a lot more, and over time the teams will edge closer. You'd think probably naturally based on the budget cap now in effect, so it should be better over time. It's expected really with new regulations that some teams, Red Bull especially, absolutely nail it, and other teams do not. Like we saw back in 2014, the Mercedes was so good, they had to hide the performance. They feared that if they showed the full potential of their car, they would just, some rules would come in that would affect them negatively. So they deliberately turned down the engine because their car was just so much better than everyone else's back in 2014 when the turbo hybrid era first came into effect. Red Bull weren't quite that far ahead this season, but it wasn't too far off in terms of how good that car was practically everywhere it went, unless there was a sprint weekend and they only got one practice session to set it up. So Verstappen is still expecting Red Bull to have the best car at the start of next season. Toto Wolff has said the same thing. They have the advantage. They have that, Mercedes reckon they're 10 months behind on development because of all the time they spent fixing their car this season, and what that's going to be for next year as well, as they're going to be probably starting slightly behind where Red Bull will be theoretically. But the penalty that Red Bull do have, the 10% reduction in testing time, does mean that when it comes to the latter half of next season, they won't have quite enough time as the other teams have to get things ready and make sure that it's all working behind the scenes. And even Verstappen mentions the tyres change a bit next season. There are some small reg changes as well, such as the leading edge of the floor is now raised by another 5mm, which has some effect potentially on reducing the porpoising, especially around circuits with fast high-speed corners like Mercedes again were experiencing in Abu Dhabi. So, he doesn't reckon it's going to be happening again. The dominance they had this year, 15 wins out of 22 races, unprecedented stuff, set a new record, and look, Verstappen's going to win plenty of races next season more than likely, but will it be 15 out of 23 races they'll be? I don't know. Can he break the record again? That would be crazy stuff. Unlikely to be the case for many reasons we just mentioned, and he even reckons, look, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe he gets burnt out a bit after all these races in the next couple of seasons. So where's the competition going to come from? Is it going to be Ferrari, or is it maybe more likely going to be from Mercedes? Some positives are for Ferrari that, again, there have been rumours circulating that they've turned their engine down significantly to make sure that it actually survives the races. We saw that a lot early on this season when they try to have the engine running at kind of, not max of course, because no engines run at max power because they've got to last several races in a season with all the sprint races now, but they had to turn it down a fair bit. All teams do this, of course, to make their engines last, but Ferrari more than most. Now, you're not allowed to upgrade over the next couple of years the power of the engine, but you can increase the reliability. So if the power is there, increased reliability should be promising for Ferrari. Also, there's their whole strategy question. What's going to happen to Mattia Binotto? Is Fred Vasseur from Alfa Romeo going to come in? He said this during the weekend, actually, on the rumours that he's going to become the TP. I won't say anything. You'll find out soon enough. So kind of suggesting possibly that there's going to be some sort of dual relationship there with Vasseur and Binotto kind of, maybe double managing the team from that perspective, because I'm not really sure Binotto's got all the tools in the arsenal to be the best team principal in the world, but, like a Horner or a Wolff, let's say, but he's still great from the technical side, and they did build a great car, but maybe he needs to be a bit more cutthroat and, make some harder decisions when they're necessary. Even this weekend, right, they made some great calls with the Leclerc pit stop. They decided not to pit him, to stay out for the one stop, and it was the correct call. Perez boxed, and if they went for the pit stop, they would therefore get undercut, so, they pretty much had to do what they did, go for the one stop, and it worked out for them. But look, a broken clock is still right twice a day, and that doesn't necessarily mean Ferrari's strategy is fixed just because they got it right one weekend. That's my opinion. Maybe they've turned a corner, but that may be doubtful. The other question, of course, is Mercedes. Ferrari built a great car this season, couldn't deliver for reasons off the track. Will Ferrari have as good of a car next year compared to this season, especially at the start and in qualifying? Maybe not. Mercedes should have a better car. They've got the drivers, they've got the team, they've got the strategy most of the time. So do they have the car? That's the question. Toto Wolff said quite confidently in this interview we saw yesterday at the end, they're like, look, yes, we're back. He believes, I guess, they've turned a corner, understand the issues with their car, confident for what they're going to be able to achieve here in the winter, that they'll get it right next year. There were probably 3 or 4 key issues with the W13 that was holding it back from Red Bull and Ferrari's pace most of the season. They addressed those as much as they could throughout the year. They probably could have done more without a budget cap, but obviously they had to restrict their development on this year's car to some degree, although it worked, especially at a circuit like Brazil. And if they can fix some of those issues, especially with, the draggy nature of their car, look, if their car was as slippery in a straight line as the Red Bull was, then they probably have a similar car in terms of competitiveness because it was losing so much of the time this season just in a straight line. So that's one of the key issues for them to address. And if they can, then they should be closer. So yeah, generally just a trend that when new regulations begin, one team comes out on top quite significantly, and then over the coming years, teams generally get a bit closer. So hopefully next season we get a competitive year, hopefully with 3 teams. We were hoping this season we'd get a 3-way fight, even a 6-way driver fight at times. We very rarely felt like we had that right. Brazil was one example where we really did have, at times, 6 cars in the fight. And also with Sebastian Vettel retiring, it now means Hamilton has more wins than the rest of the grid combined. That may not well last through next season, right? But But still, for now, Hamilton holds this over the rest of the field. Of course, depends how competitive Mercedes are next season. Quick note here on the final tyre test, as well, obviously, Hamilton isn't so happy about having to drive the W13 again. I think he said, oh yeah, I kind of wish I didn't sign up to do this, but I have to call a sickie, because it turns out he's doing tomorrow afternoon, just to do some final tyre testing with the team. Yeah, that'll be the final time he has to drive the W13, and he says, yes, he's definitely not putting it on his kind of contract of cars he wants to be able to drive in the future, and these are the other drivers getting involved for the teams this weekend. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.
It's bad and it's okay to feel like this, but next year we are back.